Hi, welcome to DevOps Days Buffalo. I'm Rob Richardson. Today we're going to talk about building a DevOps pipeline for containers. Here's the part where I tell you I'm definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. But in this talk, there are no slides. It is only live demos. So let's dig in. Well, we'll start with a GitHub repository. Here's our GitHub. Ooh, we have no code. We need to build some. You can get to this GitHub repository that will include the code that we build right now by going to robrich.org, click on Presentations. Here's Level Up Your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes, so you can get to the code right now. While you're here on robrich.org, click on About Me and you'll see some of the things that I've done recently. I'm a Cyril developer advocate. If you want to talk database security, I would love to bend your ear. I'm a Microsoft MVP, Docker captain, and friend of Redgate. AZ GiveCamp is really fun. AZ GiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver completed software to the charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ GiveCamp. Or if you'd like a GiveCamp here in Buffalo or wherever you're connecting from, hit me up on email or Twitter and let's get a GiveCamp in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, I do a lot with Docker and Kubernetes training and consulting. If you have that need, hit me up. Some of the other things that I do, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air, and they sent me a mug. Woohoo! So there's my coveted .NET Rocks mug. So let's dig in. Well, we need to build some code. Let's come here to our folder, and we have no content. So let's say .NET New, and this will scaffold out a website, or rather, show us how we can. Now we can scaffold out lots of different things. In this case, let's say .NET New MVC. I'll give it a name of Level Up DevOps and an output folder of dot. Now, if I left off name, it would use my folder name, in this case demo. And if I left off output, it would create a subfolder and put the content in there. Okay, so now we have our website. Let's open it up in VS Code. Here we go. So we have a website. Here's our home controller, and it references our view. So here's our home view. And rather than welcome, let's say, welcome to DevOps Days Buffalo. Perfect. Now, our first step is to get this into a Git repository. We'll need a new file here, a .gitignore file. Why, yes, thank you, VS Code. Can you create some stuff? It's going to create this .vs code folder. Here's this gitignore file. In the gitignore file, we want to exclude all of our built assets, so bin and obj. We want to exclude all of our user-specific content, so star.user, star.suo, the .vs folder. We could choose to exclude the .vs code folder because that might also have user-specific details. In this case, we'll just leave it in. Now we might choose to exclude other files like star.log or star.orig, all the different things that we'll exclude, but in this case, we'll just leave it at that. Now that's what we need to get to a Git repository. Now what do we need to get into a container? Well, our first step is really similar. We have a .docker ignore. Now .docker ignore is all of the things that we don't want inside of our container. Now, it has the exact same format as our gitignore file, so let's include all of the contents here. In fact, if Docker finds a gitignore file and does not find a docker ignore file, it'll use the gitignore file. That's perfect. So we want to exclude all of the built content, all the user-defined content, but we also want to exclude all of the development time content. So app settings.development.json, and here inside properties, we have another development time file, launch settings.json. Great. Now we have all the things that we definitely don't want to end up in our containers. Next, let's build a Docker file. Now, as we build this Docker file, we want it to be very specifically named Dockerfile. Now, not dockerfile.txt, just Dockerfile. Easy enough. If you accidentally named it with a .txt, rename, take off the .txt, and just leave Dockerfile. Now I've got the Docker extension inside of VS Code, so I get this nice icon telling me that I spelled it right. Now we need a few things: from, copy, run, and CMD. if you understand these 4 Docker commands, you can probably read most Docker files. Let's use each of them and a few more to build up the Docker file that we need for this project. Let's head off to Docker Hub and we'll search for .NET and land here in this repository. Now this repository is a meta repository. It shows us links to other repositories. .NET samples, that's a great collection of Docker files if you'd like to see various things built in various ways. Runtime deps is the base content that we would need to install .NET. Runtime includes the .NET runtime, so we could run console apps. ASP.NET includes the details that we need to host, and built on top of that is the SDK, which includes the build tools. Let's start there. So here with the build tools, we can see the various here's our base image that we want to grab, and scrolling down, we can see the various labels that we can use. Did I grab the wrong one? Featured tags about this image. Oh, they have removed the tags, full tag listing. There we go. So here's a list of all the tags, and we have various tags, but we also have an Alpine version. So if we use 5.0-Alpine, we'll be able to get at exactly the version that we want. So let's put that in from 5.0-Alpine. Cool. Now we need to copy all of the content from this directory where we'll run our docker build command into the current directory in our image. Where is that current directory? Let's say workdir is /src. Now we could definitely put it anywhere, var, lib. In this case, src is perfect. So we copied all of our files from our directory where we'll run docker build to this src directory, which it created and cd'd into. Next, we want to run some console commands. Now, from the command line, we would say .NET restore, .NET build. We'll build in release mode. .NET test to run all of our unit tests. We'll also call this in release mode to avoid building both a release and a debug version. .NET publish -c release, and we will send this to the dist folder. Now, this is not that unlike right-click publish inside of Visual Studio, but we're doing it in a DevOps pipeline here in our Docker file, so we'll know it will get really consistent every time. Now, what's our CMD? What do we want to run? Well, we want to run .NET level up devops.dll, and that happens to be in workdir/dist now. Now we do need a few environment variables. Let's grab some environment variables and set those in place. We will tell it to run in production mode, to start on port 80, and to expose port 80 so that things looking to discover what port to forward to know which port. Now, these commands are the things that we'll run from the console. We want to run them inside of our Docker file. So let's run this, and run this, and run this, and run this. Great. We have a Docker file, and we could use this right away. But there are some things that we can do to clean things up. Each of these lines is a different Docker file, and we'll create a new layer. But we have our build tools and our source code in our production image. That'll make it a lot bigger than we would like. So let's come back here into Docker Hub, and we'll flip over to our ASP.NET repository. And here in the ASP.NET repository, we can see here's our base image, and there's also an Alpine variant here. So with this image, let's split this in half. And so we'll go here, Alpine, and now we have this production runtime image that only includes the production content. We'll call this our production runtime server image, here in air quotes. And here is our build server image. Now all the building will happen here, and this will be just our production runtime. So let's change this up to /app. And now we do need to copy the content from the dist folder into the current folder, but right now it's going to go looking for a dist folder out here. Instead, let's say --from equals build, and we'll name this stage as build. And now we have a Docker file that is split in half. Here's our build server. Here's our production runtime image. And now our production runtime image only includes the details specifically built for this purpose. Perfect. Now there's one more thing we can tidy up. Right now we're copying all of our files, then we're restoring our dependencies, and then we're doing all the rest of the tasks. So that means if I change a CSS file or a JavaScript file, I will restore my NuGet packages. I'll expire this cached layer. I really want to do that first and then copy in all my files. Now I get the benefits of Docker caching, where Docker will cache this layer and then copy in all the other files. Now I still need to copy in my manifest, so level up devops.csproj into the current directory, then I'll run my restore, then I'll copy everything else, then I'll run my build test and publish. Great, now we have a Docker file. Our next step is to pull in a Kubernetes YAML file. I'm just going to go reach into the Kubernetes YAML file that I used last time, and let's set that in place here. That'll save us a little typing. And we probably just need to change last time to level up DevOps. And now we're ready to go. Now this Kubernetes YAML file includes a deployment. We'll launch one instance of this pod, and we'll have a service in front of that will load balance across all of the one instance, and then an ingress that will match DNS together to this service. Now we do have some replacement expressions like AKS URL and ACR URL and image label that we'll do in our build. We'll leave those names here and we'll replace them as part of the build to keep those secrets out of source control. Okay, now that we've got our Kubernetes YAML file in place, let's come to source control and commit all of our content. I'm going to stage all the changes. Oh, I do want a README file. Let's come in here and create a readme.md, new file, readme.md, and let's go grab some content for the README file. There we go. Staging all of the changes. Let's stage this one. And now we can go look through, make sure that we didn't commit any built content. We could also diff all of the files, showing the old and new versions, but in this case, every file is new. So we've got this in place, and create a website. I will commit this, and let's push that up to GitHub. Git push origin main. Now this is great. Coming back to our GitHub repository, we can already see that we've made great progress. We have all of our website in place. We have our Docker file, our Docker ignore file. We're ready to build a DevOps pipeline. We can come here into GitHub Actions and start to look at the various templates that we can use for this. Now, I did say this was an empty repository, but I did do one thing in here. I came in here to settings and I went into secrets and I created a bunch of secrets that we can use in our build pipeline. Here's my container registry, password, URL, and username, and the Kubernetes URL and kubeconfig that we'll need to log in. Okay, back here in Actions, let's go looking for a template that might work for us. Deploy to Amazon, OpenShift, IBM Cloud, Terraform, Ruby, Crystal, Dart. Let's look for one that talks about Docker. Publish a Docker container. That's pretty cool. Now this is just a template. We could definitely start from a blank template. Kubernetes YAML file. And now let's say Docker build and push Kubernetes apply. Now I don't want to do this on a schedule, so I'll remove this. I'll do it on the main branch and we'll come back to pull requests if we have a moment. But let's remove the pull request piece right now. Okay, so what are the jobs that we want to do? Well, we'll check out our content. That's perfect. Let's delete some of these extraneous steps that we don't need and focus in on a step to Docker build and push kubectl apply. Now, I'm not going to do this. I'm instead going to say run, and let's run this script. There we go. Delete this content, and I want to say Docker build. I'll give it a tag, and I will say level up DevOps and dot. We want to build in the current folder. Now, I do want to add my container registry to this. So let's head off to the docs and take a look at how we can do that. We've set our secrets in place, and now we can use this syntax for being able to reference the secrets that we created previously. Perfect. So I want to say, this is the ACR URL. Now we've got the ACR URL / level up DevOps. Let's also give it the github.sha, which is the git hash of this commit. And so now, given any running container in our cluster, we can get back to exactly the source code that created it. Perfect. Our next step is to Docker push this image up to our container registry. Now, to do that, we'll need to log into Docker. Let's come out here to the marketplace and let's look for Docker login. Docker login. This one looks like it'll be a good fit. We'll copy this YAML. We could definitely look at the full marketplace listing and see probably the GitHub repository for this. But there we go. We've got this indented correctly. And now we want to grab our registry. Now let's grab the secret that we've got, secrets.acr URL. Now we also need a username. We have a secret for that, secret/acr username. Our password, let's put in our ACR password. And then log out. Now, this doesn't log out at the end of this task, but rather at the end of the entire build. If we were on a shared host, then that might be really important. Now, the cool part about GitHub Actions is it will actually delete the build machine after it finishes. So this is just kind of extra, but it's a good practice just in case. Okay, so we've pushed that content up to GitHub. And the next thing we want to do is kubectl apply-f k8s.yaml. Okay, we want to apply that, but we first need to log into our registry. So let's come back up to the marketplace and let's search for Kubernetes set context. Here we go. This one looks like a good type. We'll indent this correctly. Now, the method that we'll use in this case is kubeconfig. And so then what is that kubeconfig? Well, good thing we have a secret here. Let's say secrets.kubeconfig. And I got this kubeconfig from my .cube file inside my directory. We don't need the rest of this because we're authenticating with a Kubernetes kubeconfig. And so we're now logged into Kubernetes. Now we did add a bunch of replacement expressions here, ACR URL, image label. So let's replace those here in our build. I'm going to copy this sed command because it's a little hairy, and that'll save us some typing. In our Kubernetes YAML file, our k8s YAML, we will not back up. We'll replace ACR with the secret, and we'll do that globally, so it'll replace all instances. AKS URL with the secret, and image label with the GitHub SHA. Now, I'm very specifically doing this after I push, because if I were to do it here, and then I accidentally say forgot to put in my .docker ignore the k8s.yaml file, I totally forgot that part, then this would get my secrets into the container. I don't want my secrets in the container, so I'm going to very specifically do this after I push this up to GitHub. There we go. We've built, pushed, set the secrets, and then apply that to our Kubernetes cluster. Now let's start a commit. Let's say GitHub Actions build script. Perfect. Now this is just a regular file in our registry, or in our repository, so if I git pull, I'll be able to see that that file came down, and popping that open here inside our VS Code, we can see exactly that code that we have available. And because there's a build YAML file inside .github/workflows, then it kicked off a build for us. Ooh, we've got a build fail. Where did that fail? 5.0-alplen. Let's spell this correctly. Dockerfile 5.0-alpine. That's better. Commit this change. Fix typo. Add kdes.yaml to ignore. We'll commit this. And let's push this up. Git push origin main. Okay. So now that we pushed some changes, then it will automatically discover this build, and we've got a new build kicked off. Perfect. Let's come here into the details, and we can see the details of our build. Now this will do all of the normal steps. When we logged into Docker Hub, we logged into the Kubernetes cluster. We then did all of the steps inside the Docker file, so that will pull down our base image. It will do our build. It will run all of our tests. It will publish that content, copy it into the new image, and ultimately push that content up to our container registry. Outside the Docker file, then we get to do the next step of pushing that to our container registry, changing all of the secrets in our Kubernetes YAML file, and ultimately starting that in our Kubernetes cluster. So it looks like we're almost done, and we've got that build green. Very nice. So before, where we didn't have any content in Kubernetes, now we can say kubectl get all, and we can see that we have our deployment and our service here inside Kubernetes. Now it may take a minute for the DNS to propagate with our ingress controller. So instead we can proxy the content into place. So port forwarding, here's port forwarding into a particular pod, port forwarding into a deployment, or port forwarding into a service. Let's do that. So kubectl port forward. We will port forward into service/level up DevOps, and we can forward port 80 into port 80 in the service. Now, if I have something else running on port 80 on my local machine, I can flip this over to 8080 on my local machine. And now let's forward into that service from there. So I'll come here to localhost 8080, and we can see our site. Welcome to DevOps Days Buffalo. That's amazing. Now that was great. We were able to build up this DevOps pipeline that did some amazing things. Now let's come back and revisit pull requests. We have this build file, and this builds our main branch. And so let's create a new file, and we'll call this dockerpr.yaml. Now this dockerpr.yaml will do most of the same steps as our Kubernetes build, so let's set that in place. And we'll say docker build for PRs. Now we want to do this on branches that are not main, and on pull requests for branches, all branches. Let's spell branches correctly. Now this one works for open source projects where I may have pull requests from others, and this works for local development efforts where I might have different feature branches from current developers. Now I want to do similar things. I want to do my Docker build. I don't need to apply this to my Kubernetes cluster, so let's delete this line. Because I'm not pushing it to my Kubernetes cluster, I don't need to change the secrets here, so let's remove this line. I also don't need to log into Kubernetes because, well, I'm not logging in there. Let's also not push this to our container registry. We don't want to accidentally run a pull request build. So that means we don't need to log into our container registry. And to that end, let's not even tag it with our container registry URL. I'll just say level up DevOps-PR. Okay, so now we have a build file perfect for pull requests. Now, wouldn't it be cool as well to have a status badge here on our repository? So right now it just has the README, but let's come back into GitHub Actions to our build, and we can come in here to the 3 dots and say create status badge. Let's copy that markdown and set that in place in our README. So let's put it right there. Okay, so let's come in here. We will stage all these changes. We can pop this open and validate that the changes are as we expect. That looks great. And so let's say add status badge and PR build. Very nice. Okay. Break out of that proxy, git push origin main, and that will add this new pull request build and status badge into place. Now we did change the main branch, so of course it will kick off a new build. And as we kick off this new build, last time we dug in through here to get to the build details. Instead, this time let's come in through actions. We can see the various builds that we have set up. So here's our PR build. It hasn't run at all yet. And here's our Docker build and push that is running right now. So let's pop that open. Here's our build stage, pop that open, and we can see it do all of the steps associated with this build. So it first logged into both Docker and Kubernetes, then it started into our Docker file. We'll start out by doing a build. It looks like our build succeeded. That's great. Let's run all of our tests. All of our tests passed. Let's publish this content. Okay, that's published. We'll flip over to the new image and package that up, push that up to our container registry, and then our next step is apply that to our Kubernetes cluster. Looks like we've applied it, and we get another green build. Very nice. Now in this case, because we have that status badge, now we have the green build right here. That's excellent. So we were able to create a DevOps pipeline for containers that started out with no code at all. We scaffolded up a website. We live coded a Docker file that did all of the steps necessary to be able to get our content into a container. In GitHub Actions, we created a Docker build and push that got our container up to our container registry, our image up to our registry rather, and started our container inside of our Kubernetes cluster. You can grab the code for this up on GitHub, click on robrich.org, click on presentations, and you can get to this GitHub presentation right away. Thanks for joining us for DevOps Days Buffalo. I'll see you in that place where the conference is designated for Q&A, or if you'd like to, tweet me at rob_rich. Let's continue the conversation. Thanks for joining us.